ago, we read Hope Against Hope by Nadezhda Mandelstam, wife of Osip Mandelstam, a well-renowned Russian poet. And it's a memoir, I suppose, especially of the last 3 years that they were together. But I think for me, as a read, this text was, I think I would describe it as captivating in the most robust and comprehensive sense of that term. So it was moving and emotional, especially full of a rich just sort of tapestry of human emotion, sorrow and pain and anger, but also joy and occasionally happiness and hope. She's sharing her personal experiences especially, but also the experiences of others suffering under the Soviet regime, in the 30s especially, but kind of jumping around. So when I say it's captivating, I mean it's hard. It's a hard read, but it's a beautiful read, right? It's challenging, it's moving and engaging. It's also intellectually profoundly stimulating. Nadezhda is clearly a brilliant woman and author. She has lived such an incredible life full of rich experiences. But I found myself, I found it just frankly difficult to read because it is painful. These experiences where she talks about homelessness, or she talks about being spied on, or she talks about her family and her friends being persecuted, sometimes killed. All of these things, like I said, really move you. I think perhaps, of course, the thing that stands out to me the most is probably, it's twofold. I would say one, when I had to do my writing assignments for the seminar, which was the second week of the course, and I had to talk about the question of homelessness in the memoir. What does it mean to be homeless for especially the Russians under Stalin's regime? And I found myself, I found it to be a wonderful and puzzling question. And I think Nadezhda Mandelstam, she does a tremendous job of pointing out that the trials and the challenges that they had to face as a family, as a couple, and that their friends had to face, but also somehow hope perseveres through those challenges. She points out in the text more than once that her homelessness basically afforded her the chance to preserve her husband's poetry, because Stalin's secret police or other spies couldn't find where she had hidden some of the manuscripts, as one example. And so all of that was really captivating. I keep returning to that term. And then the other thing that during the seminar that really came to fruition was talking about the way poetry maybe offers Osip and his compatriots, and her, Nadezhda, a certain kind of home. I suppose figurative or metaphorical, but it allows them to see home, to be at home at a time where they didn't have anywhere to go necessarily. I think Professor Howland and my colleagues in the seminar really moved me, compelled me to think about poetry in a new way that I hadn't necessarily considered before. How it offers a space for renewal and refreshment and authenticity and real connection between poets and their readers, between poets and each other, and so on. So personally, I would say it was certainly more exploratory, and I used the guidance of the prompt, speaking frankly. So I focused on a singular chapter about homelessness, and what I was searching for were just, I guess I would say maybe something like a philosophic account of what homelessness is in the text for Nadezhda, and sort of what is its essence, or what are its and what are its qualities? What does it mean to say someone is homeless? So I was looking for all those descriptors that she provides. Of course, there's so many, but just to name one or two, was talking about how, especially when they were in exile in Bordeaux, the couple really didn't have a place to call their own, just as so many exiles didn't. They were forced to rent rooms, or sometimes share rooms with others if they were lucky enough to find a place, if fortunate enough. And also how I think one of the things in Nadezhda that I sort of came to understand as I read her memoir, especially for this writing process, is how profoundly she brings to the foreground this sense of we as human beings, we need a place. We are embodied. And having a location, having a place where we belong is so essential to who we are as human beings, but also maybe especially to poets who are trying to write. And so there's this strange tension throughout the text that she's trying to wrestle with and figure out. So yes, it was more exploratory, but it wound up coming to a place of, this is what she says homelessness is, and I think she's also saying something deep and true about the human experience, what it means to be a human being. And with my colleagues, well, simply put, I usually read them before the seminar on Sunday nights, and I'll just jump into I cannot compliment them enough. Right? I'm a teacher. I'm an adjunct professor. I've also taught high school students at the University of Dallas. I'm an adjunct professor, so I read a lot of writing and I grade a lot. And just the insight and the profundity at times, and certainly the style and the prose of their writing always impressed me. Going back to the text, citing it frequently, not being brave, courageous to jump to a certain thing that recalls in another text. We would frequently talk about Dante, or we would talk, because of course Nadezhda talks about Dante, one of Osip's favorite works. So there was a breadth of knowledge that I really admire, but there was also just a clarity in their writing that really helped me think about the text in new ways. And I really appreciate and admire their work, their diligence in this regard. It just made the seminars really fruitful. So I'm very grateful for that, to see what they thought was important in the text. And yes, I think the writing process through Herzog's seminar really helped us focus on coming back to the text over and over again to try and see what Mandelstam is pointing out to us. He invites us in a noble and diligent fashion to really consider what life is like under the tyrannical regime of Stalin's administration. And yeah, I think perhaps one of those moments that really stands out for me is toward the end of the text, when she is trying to determine her husband's date of death. And she's just not sure who's telling the truth and who's not. She can't be sure who really remembers the experiences in and around the labor camps. And she's wrestling with that, and we wrestle with it alongside her. So it's really moving, because it's hard to fathom. I'm not married myself, but a wife not only not knowing when she would see, or if she would see her husband ever again, but also when she learns that he has died, not knowing when it happened. So wrestling with that mystery especially stands out to me in the course of the seminar. And so during that last class, during the last session we had together, I think both my colleagues and Professor Holland actually brought a dimension of the text out that I didn't really even know was there, which is toward the end, Nadezhda points out, I'm not really sure when Osip died. And I can't be sure because of the, again, of the deception, but also because of the conditions of the people. Their memories are fading. They're psychologically traumatized. All of these things are realities. However, I think Professor Howland, especially, but also Henrik was one of the colleagues I think who pointed this out. She might be suggesting at the very end of the last chapter, that this is actually something hopeful, that somehow, because it's beyond her power to account for it, she's almost suggesting, or at least indicating, that, but it may be in someone else's power. Whether that's pointing toward the divine, or whether that's pointing toward, well, maybe history will bear this out and we'll learn more. So originally in that impression, right, I understood that conclusion to be something at least a little bit pessimistic or sorrowful. Certainly is sorrowful, but maybe less pessimistic and less cynical than I first thought. And it was Professor Howland and my colleagues in the last seminar who convinced me or persuaded me to think, oh, no, there might be something more optimistic here, more oriented toward what good could come of this, what good could come of writing this memoir, for example. Maybe it'll inspire something new and we can gain more information. I mean, I just can't praise my colleagues enough during this seminar. Such a wealth of perspective, educative experiences, insights, people from literally all over the world. So that to me, that stands out as like the greatest strength of the online experience. That we could be together with each other, albeit virtually, reading the same text, asking each other questions about the text, and learning from one another thousands of miles away. And because it's online, it also meant, well, there were at least a few people in the class who speak Russian. So they could, point out these things in the text or point out little details in Mandelstam's poems when we read those, right? And say, oh, this word can mean this. The translation isn't bad, but actually maybe it's a little more precise to say this, so I'm very grateful for that. Without a doubt, I think the single biggest benefit of the online platform. Of course, Zoom, and I think Nadezhda actually sort of in her memoir, in her own way, points this out, writes, Zoom, while I am grateful that it is an option, and I always will be, cannot replace in-person conversation. And that's, again, I think that's one of the things that she points out, especially when she visits, or she the author visits with us, the smaller villages in Russia, the different places they went to in exile, and how, it's a double-edged sword almost, how she could be more sure of who was honestly their friend, or at least colleague, in the smaller places than in Moscow. In Moscow, they couldn't trust anybody, basically, or almost no one. And why? Well, because in the smaller villages, they just talked with everyone. They got to meet and to know each other better. And I think there's a kind of immediacy that's really healthy and good for the human experience. So, more practically speaking, in our Zoom sessions, the question and answer system, I think, is pretty good. And having Professor Howland there to direct it is helpful, to call on people, to also interject when he wants to point out a different detail. He also had a wealth of knowledge that I really admire and appreciate. He would just say, oh, Nadezhda actually talks about this in her next book, Hope Abandoned, and brings up this, a similar question that she deals with. So having that at the ready, so to speak, on Zoom was always appreciative. So that's it's a difference I don't want to necessarily say it's a pro or a con, but it is a difference of when you're in person and having a seminar conversation, there's just an organic sort of flow. And especially once you get to know each other, right? A really good seminar can be, oh, this person's talking, and I kind of know their cadence or their tempo, or I know how frequently so-and-so speaks, and so I'm waiting patiently for this person to talk. Whereas on Zoom, it is just necessarily more artificial. And I don't say that as a negative. I just say that as a reality. So, you use a little button to raise your hand. Or we had a little, tool. If we had something to say really urgently, we could point our fingers at the camera and say, oh, I really want to jump back in on this, please. So that was helpful just to have some shortcuts. So it is certainly different. And at times, really a great boon. At other times, I was just, to spin it in an optimistic way, I was like, I really want to be in a room with these people and have a conversation with a book on the same table. We're all at a round, big round table, talking about Mandelstam or talking about, Plato or whatever it is. Yeah. I'd encourage someone to apply for the Hertog Foundation because of the kinds of minds and people that it attracts. First and foremost, felt really blessed, really grateful to be in a room, a virtual, so to speak, with such intelligent, thoughtful, captivating individuals who are articulate, right, in the spoken word, but also clear in their prose writing. And I would especially encourage someone to perhaps submit an application for a text that they haven't yet read, or at least that they're not that familiar with. Maybe they've read it once, right? Because this was a new experience for me, this memoir. And Hertog offers some really unique seminars on texts that are not necessarily part of even core programs across at least the United States. So to open up, your mind to a different dimension, different side of the world, I would especially encourage people to do so. So under the guidance of Professor Howland and professors like him, and alongside distinguished colleagues, so Emma and et cetera. I can't speak highly enough of how great it was, how a lot of fun, simply speaking, a lot of fun, and a lot of learning, very wonderful learning experience. I'd recommend it strongly. I'd encourage my friends, my colleagues to consider applying, and especially maybe to something new and exciting for them.